Can we maintain our sovereign control of airspace without F-35s?
I would offer that Canadian presence in NORAD absolutely reduces the risk and increases Canada's autonomy and ability to defend itself.
If Canada did not have the F-35, do you think that American planes would more often be in Canada?
That changes our, defense capability, and as such, we have to figure out how we're going to replace that.
Imagine Canada wakes up tomorrow and the F-35 deal is gone. Not delayed, not under review, just gone. The first question people ask isn't even about stealth or missiles. It's simpler and honestly more unsettling. If Canada doesn't have the F-35, does the US end up flying more missions over Canadian skies by default? Because that's what sovereign airspace control really looks like in practice. It's not a flag on a map. It's the ability to launch, identify, intercept, and deter on your own terms, at your own pace, with your own rules. And when your next generation fighter is tied to another country's software, logistics chain, spare parts pipeline, and permissions, sovereignty starts to feel less like a guarantee and more like a negotiated privilege. That's the uncomfortable undercurrent running through the F-35 story right now. What was sold to allies as the backbone of Western air power is turning into a political lever. Not because the jet can't fly, but because the program is built in a way that gives Washington a permanent hand on the steering wheel. The aircraft isn't just a purchase, it's a relationship. And lately, that relationship is getting transactional. Look at how fast the mood shifted inside NATO. A few years ago, the F-35 was marketed as the great unifier. One platform, shared interoperability, a common shield that made alliances tighter. But now, countries are asking a more cynical question. Is this a defense program or a loyalty test wrapped in radar-absorbent coating? Switzerland is where the cracks became impossible to ignore. The country isn't even a NATO member. It's been neutral for centuries, famously cautious, and not exactly prone to panic buys. Yet, it agreed to the F-35A in a 2020 referendum, narrowly, with a budget framework that voters were told would hold. The logic was straightforward. Modern threats require modern aircraft, and the F-35 looked like the future-proof choice. Then, the cost story started to unravel. In 2024, the US would not fully lock in a fixed final price, the way Swiss planners expected. Inflation, materials, supply chain issues, all the usual explanations showed up. But from Switzerland's perspective, it felt like buying a car and being told the engine upgrade is coming later, the price might double, and you'll also need a subscription to keep it running. Estimated expenses ballooned dramatically, and that was before the long-tail costs that always follow. Maintenance, upgrades, support packages, and the inevitable small changes that never stay small. Then came the political shockwave, tariffs, and pressure. When Washington starts linking trade punishment, defense spending demands, and security commitments into one package, the psychology changes overnight. It stops feeling like a shared mission and starts feeling like leverage. Switzerland got hit with a steep tariff, and suddenly the F-35 didn't look like a neutral procurement decision. It looked like a signal, a tag that said, "This is where you stand." Public opinion followed the money. As costs climbed and confidence dropped, Swiss voters did what voters do. They questioned the deal's legitimacy, the process, and the promises. Parliament began digging into whether the original understanding was ever realistic. And at the same time, there was another issue lurking behind the headlines. The F-35's most important upgrade path. The software and hardware package that helps unlock its full intended capabilities has been repeatedly delayed and has run over budget. If you're Switzerland and you're scheduled to receive aircraft while the full capability package is still lagging, the obvious fear kicks in. Are we paying for a finished system, or are we buying into a timeline we don't control? This is the part many people miss. The F-35 isn't like older jets, where you buy the aircraft, stock parts, train crews, and largely control your own readiness. The modern system is deeply networked. Updates matter. Authorization matters. Access to the maintenance ecosystem matters, and that ecosystem is run by the United States. So even when the jet is physically sitting on your tarmac, a huge portion of what keeps it mission ready is still upstream, outside your country, and dependent on decisions you don't make. And that dependency is exactly why this has become a NATO-wide conversation rather than a Swiss budget fight. Because what happened in Switzerland isn't just a Swiss problem. It's a preview of what every partner faces if alliances become more hard-nosed and businesslike. If Washington can tie trade measures to defense behavior and defense behavior to platform dependence, then the jet itself becomes a bargaining chip. And that's why countries are suddenly reassessing their no alternative assumptions. Now, quick pause. If you're into these kinds of stories where weapons programs collide with politics, trade, and power, take a second to subscribe. Seriously, it's the easiest way to keep up with the next chapter of this, because this F-35 debate isn't slowing down, it's spreading. And the next country to blink could reshape how NATO buys weapons for the next 20 years. Germany is a great example of how allies are adapting without blowing up the alliance. Berlin didn't just trust the process and hand over the keys. It took a dual-track approach that's quietly becoming the model for what strategic hedging looks like inside NATO. Germany bought the F-35, yes, but largely for a specific role that's hard to replace. NATO nuclear sharing and certain alliance commitments that require compatibility. In other words, the F-35 purchase wasn't blind enthusiasm. It was a targeted requirement. At the same time, Germany pushed money into European alternatives. Eurofighter Typhoons, long-range planning, domestic and continental supply chains, and more. Importantly, it leaned into the next big bet, a sixth-generation program built with European partners. Not because it wants to break NATO, but because it wants options. The subtext is simple. Remain aligned, remain interoperable, but never again be in a position where your air power can be throttled by someone else's political mood. That's the new logic spreading through Europe. Diversification isn't betrayal, it's insurance. Of course, it's not painless. European defense industry has bottlenecks. Labor shortages, internal politics, disputes over who builds what, who owns which technology, who gets the contracts. And even if Europe builds the jets, it still has to wrestle with raw material supply chains and industrial capacity. But the momentum is real, because the fear is real. Dependence feels risky when the relationship becomes unpredictable. And now we come back to Canada, because Canada sits in an even more delicate position than most European countries. Canada isn't just a NATO partner. Canada is part of the continent's shared air defense architecture through NORAD. That's not symbolic. That's day-to-day reality. Radar, early warning, intercept missions, integrated command structures, and the constant question of who is responsible for what piece of sky at what moment. So, when Canada buys a fighter, it's not just buying a plane, it's buying a posture. Canada's F-35 deal is massive. 88 aircraft, about 19 billion Canadian dollars, and a replacement schedule tied to the retirement of an aging fleet that can't run forever. The original plan was to start receiving jets relatively soon and gradually phase in the new capability before the older aircraft age out. But politics change the weather. When US-Canada relations get tense, when tariffs are floated, when rhetoric escalates, when leaders talk about alliances like they're contracts that can be renegotiated at will, then any platform that locks you into US control structures becomes politically sensitive, because now your fighter isn't just a capability, it's a dependency with a price tag. Canadian defense voices have flagged three broad concerns that keep coming up. First, technological dependence. The United States controls critical parts of the F-35 ecosystem. Software updates, key maintenance pathways, logistics systems, and the broader supply chain. Even if some spare parts physically sit in Canada, the rules governing access and distribution are part of a bigger system Canada doesn't control. That creates an ugly hypothetical. If the relationship sours hard enough, could readiness degrade quickly? Even if nobody says it out loud, the question exists. Second, readiness and reliability. Modern fighters are complex and maintenance heavy. If your operational availability is low, the platform's paper capability matters less than how many jets you can actually launch tonight in winter on short notice with confidence. If a fleet struggles to sustain a high mission-capable rate, commanders end up planning around limitations rather than possibilities. And no country wants its headline defense purchase to become a hangar queen. Third, delayed full capability upgrades. When core upgrade programs slip, buyers worry they're receiving aircraft that will need years of additional work, cost, and dependency before they match the vision that was sold. That's not just a technical problem, it's a political problem because governments have to justify the purchase to voters while explaining why the full version is still coming later.